The reporting of SCDN on the issues with the state's investigation into the county commissioners, the Southern Ohio Port Authority, and the Economic Development Office has caught the attention of some well-known podcasters. In fact, they have covered this issue in 3 separate broadcasts. We have combined those 3 into one. Hear for yourselves what the outside observers are gleaning from the process. Please note that their commentary does not necessarily reflect the opinions or views of SCDN or its parent company. However, it's very good to hear how they interpret the situation. With that, let's listen to those 3 podcasts.
Okay, so you open up your local paper and bam, search warrants, whispers of clearly criminal activity, and more no comments than a politician at a press conference. It's like reading the latest episode of some small-town scandal, right?
Yeah.
But this isn't Netflix. This is happening right now in Scioto County, and it has everyone talking. We're diving into a stack of articles from the Scioto County Daily News today to try to untangle this investigation swirling around their Economic Development Office. Because, let's be real, trying to follow this story through their articles, it's like trying to untangle a string of Christmas lights in the dark. So, search warrants, accusations flying every which way, and the Scioto County commissioners are standing there like, we have absolutely no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Which you have to admit is a little hard to believe.
Just a tad.
We're talking about some potentially serious stuff here.
Yeah.
Taxpayer money, whispers of conflicts of interest. So to help us unpack all of this, I've got our expert here who's been poring over these articles with the precision of, like, a bloodhound. What's got you hooked?
Well, the timeline itself is pretty wild. That first article from about a month ago hits us with the bombshell. Search warrants have been issued. Now, the commissioners were quick to say they were fully cooperating, of course, but then completely clammed up, no specifics, no details, radio silence.
Which honestly just makes the whole thing even more sus, right?
Oh, absolutely. And it only gets more intriguing. Fast forward 3 weeks and Commissioner Powell drops that clearly criminal comment. Suddenly, the stakes are a lot higher.
Yeah, that's the moment where you go, okay, this is serious.
Mm-hmm.
But then, still no details, just more, we can't comment, and the investigation is ongoing. It's enough to drive you crazy.
And this is where that lack of transparency really muddies the waters. But if we piece together what we do have, we can at least get the key players straight.
Okay, so break it down for us. We've got our Scioto County commissioners, Powell, Davis, and Coleman. Has they been on the same page through all of this?
About as coordinated as a flock of pigeons trying to land on a statue. And this is especially clear in how they've handled Robert Horton, their economic development director. He seems to be right at the heart of this whole mess.
Right, Horton. And he's also the president of the Southern Ohio Port Authority, which I have a feeling is about to become very important.
It already is. Because get this, just 2 weeks ago, the Scioto County Daily News, they drop another bomb. They uncovered this potential conflict of interest involving Horton and a company called Steel Buildings.
And this is where it gets really interesting for anyone who hasn't been following this whole thing super closely. So what's so important about this Steel connection?
Well, to put it simply, it looks like Horton was playing both sides of the field. The article suggests he was involved in awarding contracts to Steel while also acting as, like, a representative for them, even earning commissions on at least one of the deals.
Hold on. He was on both sides of the negotiating table. How does that even work?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And we're not talking about small potatoes here. Between 2021 and 2022, Steel Buildings was awarded over $1.7 million in contracts.
Whoa. You'd think with that kind of money floating around, someone would notice a potential conflict of interest.
Right. But here's the real kicker. The article mentions documents signed by Horton himself that clearly identify him as an Steel representative during this time.
So there's no way the commissioners can claim they were totally in the dark about this.
Well, that's where things get really interesting and more than a little frustrating. You see, their responses haven't exactly inspired confidence. Remember Commissioner Davis's comment about the Steel contracts?
Oh, yeah, he practically washed his hands of the whole thing. He said something like, you'll have to ask the Port Authority. We're not privy to those notes. Like he was trying to run away from a 5-alarm fire.
Exactly. But here's the thing. The Scioto County Daily News articles also mention that Davis claimed no commissioners were even present at the meetings where these contracts were discussed.
Wait, seriously? They're telling us that nobody from the county commission bothered to show up to meetings where they were awarding millions of dollars in contracts. Come on, that's just unbelievable.
That's what they're claiming, yeah. And if it's true, that's a pretty big oversight.
They just blindly signed off on whatever Horton put in front of them. Are they seriously asking us to believe that?
That's the gist of their defense, yes. Though they've also thrown out the old "we're not lawyers" line a couple of times.
As if that's supposed to make it all okay. Like pleading ignorance is a get-out-of-jail-free card. Even if they didn't understand all the legal mumbo-jumbo, shouldn't they have at least been asking some questions? I mean, hello, taxpayer money.
Right. This goes way beyond just whether laws were broken, though. I'm sure the investigators are looking into that, too. This is about accountability, transparency, just completely disregarding the public trust.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What are the potential consequences here? If this investigation finds that there was some shady business going on, who's held accountable? Is it just Horton, or could the commissioners be in hot water too?
Well, it's too early to say for sure. A lot depends on what exactly the investigators find. But hypothetically, if there's evidence that the commissioners were aware of or even complicit in wrongdoing, then yes, they could be in serious trouble.
Like what kind of trouble are we talking?
Fines, removal from office, even criminal charges in a worst-case scenario.
Wow. Okay, so the stakes are pretty high. And this isn't just some political drama. This kind of thing can have real consequences for a place like Scioto County.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't about just one company, one contract. It really gets at the heart of public trust in local government. And when that trust is broken, it's really, really hard to rebuild.
And we haven't even gotten to the most eyebrow-raising detail yet. Didn't the article say that Horton's wife and Commissioner Davis's wife were also involved with O'Steele?
Yeah, that little detail. To be fair, both women have been scrubbed from O'Steele's website since the investigation started. Damage control, maybe? But it definitely adds another layer to this whole thing.
Yeah, I think. It's not exactly every day you see a situation where the people handing out these big contracts are potentially related to the people getting those contracts. Talk about a conflict of interest.
It raises so many questions. Did any of the commissioners know about these connections beforehand? Were they aware of their wives' involvement with O'Steele? And if not, why not?
Exactly. If they didn't know, it just proves they were totally checked out. And if they did know, well, that opens up a whole other can of worms.
For sure. It makes their whole "we were clueless" act even harder to believe. It's like they want us to believe they were totally oblivious to the dealings of this company that just happened to be raking in millions of dollars in kind contracts. And oh, by the way, had ties to their own families. I don't know about you, but that seems a little fishy, don't you think?
A little. I'd say that's pushing it. It makes you wonder, is this kind of thing more common than we think? Are there other Scioto counties out there where this stuff is happening under our noses and we just don't know about it?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, we don't have a clear answer right now. But I think it's safe to say that this whole thing has shown just how important transparency and accountability are at every level, even local government. Because this case shows that things can go very wrong when the people in charge aren't being held accountable.
And it makes you realize just how important good local journalism is, especially when it comes to holding the powerful accountable. Because let's be real, this whole thing might still be under wraps if the Scioto County Daily News hadn't been all over it.
Absolutely. Give whoever's been on this story a raise. But even with their reporting, there's still a lot we just don't know.
And that's what we're here for. So we've covered a lot of ground, but what are the biggest question marks still hanging over this whole thing?
Well, the big one, and this is the one that's really got people talking, is what's in those search warrants? Like, what are investigators looking for exactly? What have they found? Until we know that, it's anyone's guess.
Okay, so big question mark there. What about Horton himself? Has he said anything publicly?
Not a peep as far as the articles tell us.
Which, no surprise, is probably smart, legally speaking. But it sure makes you wonder what his side of the story is.
Right.
So we play the waiting game. But in the meantime, what about Scioto County? This can't be good for their image, especially if they're trying to attract new businesses and get people to invest.
It's definitely a blow. Even if, and that's a big if, even if nothing illegal actually happened, the perception of shady dealings is already out there. That makes investors nervous.
It's a shame. From what I've read, Scioto County's been working hard to get back on its feet. This feels like a step backwards.
For sure. But it's not the end of the world. What matters now is how the commissioners handle this moving forward.
What do you mean?
They need to be upfront about what happened, really show they're serious about transparency from here on out, and do whatever it takes to make sure this never happens again.
So for everyone listening back in Scioto County, and really anyone following this story, what's the takeaway? What can people do to stay in the loop and make sure their voices are heard?
Don't be afraid to make some noise. Show up at those public meetings, even if they're boring. Call up your elected officials and let them know you're watching, you're paying attention, and you expect them to do better.
Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to accountability. And that only happens when we, the people, demand it. Well said. And for you listening at home, here's something to think about. What can we all do to push for more transparency and accountability in our local governments? Because as we've seen today, even in a place like Scioto County, things can go wrong when those in power aren't held responsible. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and remember, every deep dive is a chance to learn something new.
Okay, so you know how sometimes you scroll past local news?
Yeah, I get it.
It's usually like new stop sign on Main Street or cat stuck in tree.
Riveting stuff.
Right. But in Scioto County, things have gotten, shall we say, a little more interesting than a slow news day.
Yeah, a little bit.
We're talking search warrants, investigations, possible shady dealings.
The good stuff.
And you know what? We're not lawyers.
Definitely not.
But we did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. No, but seriously, since you wanted the inside scoop on this whole commissioner situation, we went full-on Sherlock Holmes and did a deep dive into the Scioto County Daily News.
Excellent local paper.
They've really been all over this. 5 articles to be precise.
They have been on top of it, which is great because, frankly, there's been a lot of silence from officials.
Yeah, and you know what they say? Quiet room probably means people whispering about stuff they don't want you to know.
Probably.
But before we even get to the hush-hush, you might be thinking, why should I even care about this?
Right, and the thing is, this isn't some political drama happening in D.C. These allegations, if they're true, this could directly impact how the county spends your money.
Your tax dollars.
Exactly. Projects, your community, all of that.
So think of this deep dive like your cheat sheet, okay?
Yes.
Who's who, what's what, and why should I even give a darn?
Exactly.
So it all starts August 15th of this year.
August 15th. Jot that down, folks. That's when things go from like 0 to 60.
Fast.
The Ohio Auditor's Office, they show up, and not for a friendly visit, they came with search warrants.
Not one, but for all 3 Scioto County commissioners.
The trifecta.
Plus, the County Economic Development Director, the SCDN. They were the first ones to break this news.
They've been really digging into the details ever since.
So, of course, SCDN goes, knocks on the commissioners' doors. What do they have to say for themselves? Spill the tea, right?
Not a chance. No comment, basically. They claim they didn't even know what the warrants were about.
Cooperating fully.
Sure.
But zero explanation.
Zero.
So, August 15th, feds are sniffing around, commissioners are playing it coy.
Classic.
A week goes by, everyone's dying to know what's up.
Of course.
This is where the SCDN reporting starts getting really good.
August 22nd, things heat up.
Okay.
They uncover a connection. The Economic Development Director, a guy named Robert Horton, and a business called O'Steel Buildings.
O'Steel Buildings. That name's familiar.
It should be. And this is where it gets good. So Horton, he wasn't just the Economic Development Director. He also held another pretty powerful position, president of the Southern Ohio Port Authority.
Okay, and remind us, why is that a big deal?
Because they basically control major funding, big development projects in the county.
So he's got his fingers in 2 very important pots, is what you're saying.
2 pots that probably shouldn't be touched by the same hands. And it gets better. The SCDN keeps digging, right? They find out that Horton's wife, and get this, Commissioner Davis's wife, they formed an LLC together.
Wait, hold on. Their wives are in business together.
Business partners.
This is better than a soap opera. What was the name of this company?
What else? O'Steel Building Systems of Ohio?
Oh, come on. You can't make this stuff up. So not only is there this potential conflict of interest with Horton, but now we've got the wives involved.
It's a lot to unpack. And you know how the SCDN loves connecting those dots?
Oh, yeah, they're good at that.
They actually asked about this whole potential conflict of interest thing a full year earlier.
No way. So they were already onto something. What happened? Did someone lawyer up and make it go away?
We don't know all the details yet, but the timing, super suspicious. But just when you think it couldn't get any juicier. August 29th, another date for you. New player enters the scene. August 29th, we meet WNXT reporter Bill Shope.
Oh, yeah, he's got that whole, like, I'm not afraid to ask the tough questions vibe.
Totally. So he crashes a commissioner's meeting.
No way, he just shows up.
Oh, yeah, and he comes prepared.
Okay, prepared how?
Yeah.
Like with a camera crew?
Better. He's got documents.
Receipts. I love it.
Allegedly, showing Horton, back when he was still running the Port Authority, he was acting as a sales rep.
Wait, hold on. For who else?
O'Steel Buildings.
Get out!
And not just representing them, we're talking earning commissions on deals made.
So you're telling me This guy's potentially steering county money to a company that's lining his own pockets.
That's what it looks like.
Bold move, Horton, bold move. So Shope just drops this bomb in the middle of a meeting. What do the commissioners do?
Remember that whole no comment strategy?
Oh, yeah, their favorite.
They double down hard. September 6th, they lawyer up.
Smart move, probably.
But then it's the blame game.
A classic for a reason. Who'd they try to throw under the bus?
Everyone, basically. Talk to the Port Authority. That's for investigators to decide. They even suggested that the SCDN should, and I quote, focus on more positive news.
Oh, the irony. So it's September 6th, pressure's building, commissioners are scrambling.
Right, but the SCDN, bless their hearts, they don't back down. They publish even more articles, digging into the timeline, the connections. They even point out this whole thing, this investigation. It's been dragging on for, get this, over a year.
A year. Someone was clearly dragging their feet. No wonder people are suspicious.
Exactly.
Okay, before we get too far into the weeds, remind us who these Scioto County commissioners even are.
Right, so we've got Brian Davis, Kathy Coleman, and Scotty Powell.
And these are our elected officials, folks, chosen by the people.
Accountability matters, just saying.
So, what are we even talking about here? Misuse of funds? Bribery?
Still a little fuzzy, that's the thing.
But we know they haven't offered much of an explanation.
Lots of no comment, lots of finger pointing.
Which, not exactly reassuring.
Not really.
Okay. And then there's Horton, our economic development director / former Port Authority guy.
Yeah.
Anything from him?
Radio silence, probably on advice of his lawyer, to be fair.
Yeah, smart move for him. But let's talk about O'Steele for a second. They're the ones supplying materials for that new business park, right?
The SR Air Business Park, one of the biggest projects in Scioto County history. Jobs, investment, the whole shebang.
It's supposed to be a big deal for the area. But if the materials are coming from some shady deal...
Raises questions about the whole project, really. Was the bidding fair? Are costs inflated?
And is this even the tip of the iceberg? I mean, what else don't we know?
That's what's so concerning. This could be just one piece of a much bigger puzzle.
So we're talking potential corruption, conflicts of interest, this whole web of connections. But I think for a lot of people, they hear about this stuff, and it's like, okay, so what? How does this even affect me?
You're right, it can feel very inside baseball,
Exactly.
But here's the thing. This isn't just about some abstract political scandal. This is about real people's lives, real money.
Put that into perspective for us.
Yeah.
How does this hit home for the average person in Scioto County?
Think about the SIR Business Park. Big project, right?
It's supposed to be huge for the local economy.
Jobs, investment, all of that good stuff. But what if those contracts, those materials, they were awarded unfairly? What if costs are inflated because of these shady deals?
Suddenly, we're not just talking about steel beams. We're talking about how far your tax dollars can actually go.
Exactly. It's less money for schools, for roads, for everything else that matters to people's everyday lives.
And then there's the whole trust issue. I mean, if you can't trust your elected officials to do what's right, to spend your money responsibly.
It creates this environment of cynicism, of apathy. People start to feel like their voices don't matter.
Which, let's be real, is probably exactly what some of these folks want.
It's easier to operate in the shadows when nobody's looking. But the thing is, we can't afford to be apathetic. We can't just throw up our hands and say, oh, well, that's politics.
So what do we do? How do we fight back against that feeling of helplessness?
Knowledge is power. Right. Read the SCDN, stay informed about what's happening, follow the money, and most importantly, make your voice heard.
Even if you think it doesn't make a difference.
Especially then. Contact your commissioners, go to those public meetings. I know they can be boring.
Oh, tell me about it.
But that's how we hold them accountable. Ask tough questions. Don't let them off the hook with vague answers or no comments.
This is your community, your money, your future. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Exactly. And, this whole thing, it's not over yet.
The plot thickens.
The SCDN is still digging. There might be more shoes to drop.
Well, we'll be watching for sure, and we'll be back to break it all down for you, as always.
Always a pleasure.
And to everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this wild ride through Scioto County politics. Remember, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay engaged. Until next time.
All right, so ready to dive into this Scioto County thing?
Absolutely. Got my scuba gear ready.
Seems like we're dealing with some heavy stuff here. Allegations of corruption, conflicts of interest, lack of transparency, the whole 9 yards, the kind of stuff you see in those small-town crime dramas.
And we've got a stack of articles from the Scioto County Daily News their open letter to local officials, and some background info on their journalistic practices. Should be interesting to see how this all unfolds.
Yeah, SCDN, right. They're the biggest media outlet down there in South Central Ohio, aren't they?
That's right, the main source of news for that whole region. They've really been pushing for more transparency lately, which is interesting.
It makes you wonder what really prompted this shift to more investigative journalism.
Well, their open letter mentions facing some criticism, actually, for not holding local officials accountable. Sounds like the community felt they weren't doing enough.
You know, that takes guts, especially for a local paper. It's not always easy to make those kinds of waves.
Agreed, it can be a tightrope walk, but it seems like they felt a responsibility to dig deeper, especially given the challenges Scioto County has been facing. We're talking hepatitis, the opioid crisis, poverty, serious issues.
Right, this isn't just some abstract political drama. This stuff has a real impact on people's lives.
Exactly, and that's what makes this whole situation even more concerning. When you've got a community already struggling, even the slightest whiff of corruption can erode trust and make it harder to address those very real problems.
And to make things even more interesting, it's not just the newspaper on this case. We've got Bill Shope, that local radio reporter, right, from WNXT.
Oh yeah, he's become a key player, showing up at those commissioner meetings, demanding answers. Seems like there's a real appetite for the truth in Scioto County.
Okay, so we've got a community on edge, a newspaper stepping up, a radio reporter turning up the heat.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly are these allegations? And who's at the center of it all?
Well, the Ohio Auditor's Office is doing some digging, and their investigation seems to be zeroing in on Robert Horton, the Scioto County Economic Development Director.
Okay, and he's the guy.
He's also the president of the Southern Ohio Port Authority.
Wait, hold on, he's wearing two hats here.
Two very important hats.
Yeah.
And that's where things start to get really interesting.
For those of us who aren't experts on local government, what exactly is a port authority? What do they actually do?
Basically, they're a public agency, and they have the power to develop and manage things like ports and other transportation infrastructure. They play a huge role in economic development, especially in areas like Scioto County.
So we're talking about a lot of influence, potentially a lot of money flowing through this port authority.
Exactly. Which is why Horton's dual roles are so fascinating, because the investigation is looking into potential conflicts of interest related to a company called O'Steel Buildings.
Steel buildings. Okay, what's the connection there?
Well, back in 2021, Horton was listed as a representative for O'Steel Buildings. Then, just a year later, in 2022, we see a connection between Horton's wife and O'Steel.
Okay, so we've got a potential conflict of interest brewing already.
And it gets thicker. Shortly after that connection with his wife emerges, the Southern Ohio Port Authority, the very organization Horton leads, starts awarding contracts to O'Steel Buildings.
You're kidding? Are we talking one contract or...
We're talking a series of contracts. And this is where SCDN really starts digging. They were the first to pick up on this, started making inquiries. But get this, their investigation was met with resistance. Legal threats even, when they initially started asking about the connection between Horton and O'Steel.
Whoa, hold up. They tried to silence the press for simply asking questions.
Yeah, it definitely raises some eyebrows, right?
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, what else might be going on behind closed doors?
Sounds like someone doesn't want us snooping around.
Maybe not. But
Yeah.
that's the beauty of a free press, right? They shine a light on things that some might prefer to keep hidden.
Exactly. Sunlight's the best disinfectant, as they say. It's like they say, where there's smoke, there's fire. This whole thing with trying to silence the press just makes it all seem even fishier. But what about the Scioto County commissioners? Where do they fit into all of this? They oversee county affairs, right?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yep.
And their response so far has been, well, interesting to say the least. They're basically pleading ignorance, saying they have very limited knowledge about Horton's dealings, especially anything to do with the Port Authority.
Really? See, this is where I get a little fuzzy on how local government actually works. Can they really just plead ignorance like that? I mean, didn't they appoint the members of that port authority in the first place?
Well, yeah. They do have a say in who sits on the board of the Southern Ohio Port Authority, and that's where things get a little murky, legally speaking, that is.
Okay, so break it down for me. What exactly is their oversight responsibility? Like, how much are they actually responsible for?
So public officials, like these commissioners, right, they're elected to serve the best interests of their constituents. And that means ensuring transparency and accountability in all county dealings, even when it involves things like a port authority, which might seem like a separate entity.
Right.
They might not be involved in the day-to-day operation, sure, but they do have a duty to ask tough questions, address potential conflicts of interest, that sort of thing.
So they can't just turn a blind eye and pretend they have no clue what's happening, especially when it involves potential corruption and misuse of, we're talking about, public funds, right?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if the investigation reveals that they actually knew or should have known about Horton's activities?
Well, in that case, they could be held accountable. And we could be talking serious legal ramifications. Perhaps even violations of Ohio's ethics laws, which are designed to prevent exactly this kind of situation.
Wow, this is getting serious. So Ohio, they have specific laws that address conflicts of interest like this, especially for public officials.
Oh, absolutely. Ohio has a whole set of ethics laws that public officials are bound by. For instance, there's a section that specifically addresses something called improper use of a public position, which basically says that officials can't use their position to benefit themselves or their family members.
So hypothetically, if Horton was steering all these contracts towards this company and it turns out he or his wife were benefiting financially, that would be a big no-no.
Exactly. That would be a direct violation. And if the commissioners were aware of it, and they didn't take action, well, they could be seen as complicit.
It's like a game of chess, isn't it, this whole thing? And everyone's moves are being scrutinized. It really underscores the importance of transparency and accountability in government, especially at the local level, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We often get caught up in the big national political stories. But these local issues, they have a much more direct and immediate impact on people's lives.
It's true.
And when that public trust is eroded, it makes it that much harder to address the very real, tangible problems facing a community. We're talking about poverty, the opioid epidemic, healthcare access, things that really hit home for people.
And those are problems Scioto County knows all too well.
Right, and it creates a vicious cycle.
Speaking of impact, let's talk about the potential consequences here. If the investigation uncovers actual wrongdoing, what could realistically happen to Horton and these commissioners?
Well, legally speaking, a lot depends on the severity, right?
Right.
We could be talking anything from fines and reprimands to, in the most extreme cases, even criminal charges. Remember those Ohio ethics laws we were talking about? Those aren't just suggestions. There are real teeth to those, and violations can lead to serious consequences.
And what about the political fallout? I have to imagine this isn't going over too well with the voters of Scioto County.
Yeah, you're right. The political ramifications, those could be just as significant as the legal ones, if not more so. Elected officials live and die by public trust or the lack thereof. Even just the appearance of impropriety, that can be incredibly damaging.
So we could be talking resignations, recall elections, or at the very least, a very, very tough re-election campaign for those involved.
Exactly. And, this whole situation really underscores the importance of local journalism. If it weren't for SCDN and reporters like Bill Shope really digging into this, who knows if this would have ever even come to light?
Right. They're the ones holding those in power accountable.
Giving a voice to the community, making sure these issues don't stay hidden. Makes you wonder, though, what else is going on in other communities across the country, right? What can everyday citizens do to make sure their local officials are actually acting in their best interests?
It's a good question, and one I think a lot of people are probably asking themselves right now. Yeah, it really makes you think. It's easy to get caught up in all the national news, the big headlines. But the truth is, what happens right here in our own communities, that's what actually hits closest to home.
Absolutely. Local politics, it doesn't always grab the spotlight, but it really shouldn't be overlooked because it directly affects our daily lives in so many ways. Our schools, our roads, public safety, even economic development, like we're seeing in Scioto County.
It's true. We've seen how this whole thing unfolded. I mean, we started with these, what seemed like isolated allegations, and now we're talking about potential conflicts of interest, abuse of power, a real lack of transparency, and it could have some major consequences for those involved.
Right. And it all goes back to that core principle of accountability. When those in power, whether it's a local official or, the CEO of some big company, when they're not held accountable for their actions, it erodes trust, and it can really damage the whole system.
It's a good reminder that, we all have a role to play in this. We can't just sit back and assume everything's hunky-dory. We have to demand transparency and ethical conduct from our leaders.
I agree. We can't just be passive observers. We need to be asking those tough questions, making our voices heard, holding our elected officials accountable for their actions. That's what makes a democracy actually function the way it's supposed to.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, any final thoughts for our listeners? What can they take away from all of this? What can they do?
Well, I'd say, first and foremost, stay vigilant. Pay attention to what's happening in your own backyard. Go to those town hall meetings. Read your local newspapers. Support investigative journalism. And never be afraid to ask those tough questions, the ones that make people in power a little uncomfortable.
Love it. Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Really appreciate you walking us through all of this.
My pleasure. It's been great unpacking this with you.
And for everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this situation in Scioto County and, the importance of staying engaged in local politics. Remember, the fight for transparency and accountability, that's an ongoing thing. So stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, thanks for listening.